Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, in Orleans Parish, voters seem to have had little confidence in the D.A.'s prosecution record, which he's now revamping. We'll look at these stories, plus encouraging news about COVID, an unusual development in the investigation of a nursing home operator, and a look at what the rest of the nation is learning about the city's return to a full carnival. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Roby Chavez, Communities Correspondent, PBS NewsHour, and John Simerman, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go on over to you, and it is kind of encouraging news what we're hearing about COVID right now.
Yeah, the news is good that the latest reports say that there's the state's reporting a decline in all categories across the state in the number of cases being reported. Vaccinations still aren't where you thought they'd be. Vaccinations, people have gotten a full complement of something like 52%, but at least something seems to be happening, and so people seem a little bit more encouraged. The death rate's still a little high, but the fact is that there are fewer cases, I think, beckons well for the long run. Meanwhile, the State Department of Health put out a statement, sort of like a guide for Mardi Gras, and the fact that they're even talking about guide for Mardi Gras, which they wouldn't have talked about last year, I think is a good thing. And it's all things that you'd expect. Be sure to wear your mask and get your vaccinations. And so the general feeling seems to be upbeat. A curious thing, if you remember last year, around this time, we were hearing talk about COVID. People were talking about it, but maybe I don't know if anybody was taking it that seriously at that point. And when we really got the message that things were starting to get tough around here was that period between Mardi Gras and St. Patrick's Day, which is the 17th. And so this year, by the time Mardi Gras is finished, you've got 16 days before St. Patrick's Day. And we want to see if we had the same reaction because it was St. Patrick's Day that the Cantrell administration said, okay, no more partying, no more celebrating, and people getting the news about lockdowns. And so if we can get past Mardi Gras and get into that phase and see that it's different from last year, I think that'd be an encouraging situation.
And Errol, it's been such a dramatic change from the beginning of the year, particularly for New Orleans, who's done very well. We had a peak of 1,300 cases a week. We're now down, I think, to 77 cases a week, and that's the last 3 days. We've had way less than 100. The vaccination rate's a whole lot better here in New Orleans than across the state. 84% of the adults here are fully vaccinated. 44% of kids 5 to 17 are fully vaccinated. So the city believes if they can make it through this Mardi Gras with the mitigation efforts that they have, that maybe some of these other events, including the St. Patrick's Day and Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest, which all announced this week, then we should be in good shape. The key here will be whether or not there's a new variant that comes out.
Right, and of course, in the parish of Orleans, as you pointed out, Robbie, there's a really a high rate of vaccinations, both for adults and the children 5 and up. But this is an area that's going to have more than just Orleans Parish residents, an event that's going to have more than Orleans Parish residents. So there are pretty strict requirements to follow for businesses and restaurants. If somebody comes into Orleans, they have to prove vaccination or they have to prove a negative test. That's really pretty tight still.
Yeah, so folks will be coming in from all over the state. In fact, a lot of the tourism officials believe this will be more of a regional Mardi Gras from what we're seeing. And so you'll have folks from Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish that have some of the lowest vaccination rates and have high test positive rates. Those folks will be coming here. So I think that's why they were talking a bit about Mardi Gras, how important it is to enforce these mandates that are in place to show whether or not you've been vaccinated or whether or not you have a test. And so Yeah, it will be clear to kind of watch to see how the outsiders will respond to these mitigation efforts, but also whether or not that will change our situation here in the city.
And you know, in a very New Orleans type of way, it's really curious that our main gauge so far has been parades. Remember, it goes back to October. You know, the administration says, well, let's see how we do with the crew of Boo. And people, you know, were out in the surveying with the crew of Boo. Apparently, we passed the test on that. They didn't say that about the crew, the Vieux Carré crew last week. But if there had been an outbreak, we would have noticed, and people would have been talking. And so apparently, we passed muster on that. So if we get past Mardi Gras, this will really be the big test right now, maybe even on a national level.
Yeah. They'll be keeping an eye on it. Dr. Jennifer Avegno was saying this week they're going to be passing out tests similar to what they did for the crew of Boo. They're going to be collecting some information so they can kind of identify a lot sooner whether or not the virus is being spread again here in the city and whether or not that's having an impact. Keep in mind, back in 2020, it was an unknown super spreader event. We didn't find out until well after the fact. So hopefully the mitigation efforts and some of this kind of tracing and tracking will help us to respond if it does indeed go back up.
Because indeed, Mardi Gras, well, as Errol likes to point out, it's on the calendar. It's going to happen, but the full carnival is going to go along with it this year, which is great news for everybody. All right, guys, let's move on over to John right now. And you had a piece about Orleans Parish DA Jason Williams kind of taken a different turn in his initial approach and taken over office regarding bail.
That's right. I mean, there's been a lot of focus on the criminal justice system in New Orleans lately, and a lot of new initiatives seem to come out almost daily trying to address this crime surge that is lasting and really troubling and showing few signs of abating. I mean, with carjackings and homicides in particular. We had 2 more people shot or killed this morning, and apparently 60 some odd carjackings since the start of the year, which is on pace to shoot well past the extraordinary numbers we've had the last couple of years. So there have been a lot of initiatives coming out and being announced. One initiative that wasn't announced that District Attorney Jason Williams began soon after appearing before the City Council to kind of get his time over the spit over this crime problem, is he's told his prosecutors to go in for when people are arrested and make their first appearances, and bail is set, and magistrate commissioners, and a magistrate judge set those initial bails. He's gone in and asked his prosecutors to request and recommend really high, compared to the norm, bail amounts for violent crimes, for serial property offenders mostly. And that's something he didn't do in the beginning. In his first year in office, which began early last year, he essentially, his prosecutors didn't really get involved in many of those first appearance bail issues. His thought was, look, this is a decision of commissioners and a judge, and Leon Canizero, his predecessor, used to get into it a little bit with judges and commissioners when they would set low bails, but he didn't want to enter that fray, he says, and so he left it alone. But now that he's come under a lot of criticism for a lot of these bail kind of numbers have come out for some of the people who've been let out and gotten into some trouble later that feel low to a lot of people. And so he's responding by showing what he thinks a bail amount should be in these cases. He's ruffled a lot of feathers with people who supported him as a progressive when he ran as a reformer. That's sort of jarring to them for someone who was, who campaigned on bail bond reform to see this kind of scheduling. And the reason for that is bail is supposed to be an individualized determination based on a number of factors. And these kind of schedules in judges' hands have been frowned upon by the courts in some cases, and sort of relying on the crime, just the crime itself, to determine the risk of reoffense or the risk of not coming back to your next court date, which is what bail is supposed to be about. That sort of worries some of his supporters, I would say.
And then there's been there was a turnover in some of the judges too, who were elected on the kind of those progressive type issues.
Well, it's interesting because this is the first real lasting crime wave since we've experienced this criminal justice reform of the last 5 years. That's played out at the state level in the reduction of the prison population, but it's also played out in the court in Orleans Parish, where a lot of advocates have pushed for bail bond reform, and the court in some sense has embraced that. They're using risk scores. The court is now doing its own. It took that in from kind of advocates and said, we're going to do our own, risk scoring of people who are arrested, and we're going to, and with the idea of reducing the population of the Orleans Parish Jail. The bulk of that, and the City Council participated too in terms of bonds on the municipal court level. And so that's been focused on nonviolent offenders. And so what the DA is saying here is, look, it's different with violent folks, and we're going to ask for these huge requests. The commissioners haven't really been too happy about it. They've sort of put those prosecutors' feet to the fire. In a lot of cases, set lower bonds. But it's interesting to see kind of how, what's going on with the reforms that have taken place over the 5 years now that we're seeing crime on the rise.
Yeah, because the reduced bail and reduced incarceration was really a big push.
It was.
About a decade ago, a little less than a decade ago.
And in fact, rearrest rates were down from, it looks as though bail bonds in general went down, the dollar figures that were set by the judges, and rearrest rates have gone down as well. So, whether higher bonds are going to work, it's a little early to say how many more people those are keeping behind bars, or those recommendations. Again, ultimately it's for the commissioners and the judge in magistrate court to set those initial bonds.
And a big part of the argument for lesser bonds for nonviolent offenders was that it prevents a person from having a job. It actually could be more costly to society, and so that was an argument presented in making sure that those who are nonviolent offenders could be released and get back to their lives.
Right. That it affects the poor, and in New Orleans, black community most, that it penalizes them for being poor. That's kind of the idea. Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. We'll see where all of that ultimately goes. All right, Robbie, let's go back on over to you. And you did a piece for PBS NewsHour acquainting the nation with the fact that, yes, we are holding our big party this year. So what did you tell folks, and what has been the response?
One of the things I love about this position with the PBS NewsHour is they wanted to hire someone that actually lived here in the city so they could lift the voices of the folks and tell those stories in the way that people who live here tell those stories. And so for Mardi Gras, this gave me a unique opportunity to kind of touch those people who have a love affair with this city, have so many memories and lifetime moments that have happened in this city, and just kind of connect them to the struggle that folks have had here in the city, and tell it in a different way. When the news caravans come in here and they tell about Mardi Gras, they usually go down the Bourbon Street and tell the story around that. But what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about how we got here and how we're able to kind of put this party on again for folks, so that when you go out to that Zulu parade and you grab a coconut from the crew of Zulu, you know that crew suffered a bit before we were able to have this Mardi Gras. They lost, as you know, 20 members, severely impacted by the pandemic. And so, this is a day that we're going to celebrate the legacy of those that died. We're going to celebrate those of us who have survived. And those folks who are coming to visit us, we want you to know the impact that it's had, so that you can act properly and safely, so that we don't have to go through that again. I wanted to also talk a little bit about the tradition of Mardi Gras, which folks, again, don't always get a clear picture of. I told a story of a mother and a daughter in the crew of Joan of Arc, who she wanted to pass this tradition of marching in Joan of Arc to her daughter. We were right in the middle of Omicron. It was raging all over the place. It was a tough decision for her to decide whether or not they were going to march or not. Ultimately, they followed all the precautions. They got all the shots that they needed. They were a little nervous. Crew members were dropping out at the last minute. Ultimately, as we've known, all of these parades have gone on without much of a challenge. And so I think those are the kinds of things that I think wanted to just open people's eyes about what is happening with Mardi Gras and why we're able to kind of do it.
So what kind of feedback are you getting? And this, once again, was to the nation, letting the country know we're doing this. What do people think about Mardi Gras?
Yeah, you know, it's always interesting, particularly now with the pandemic, these big, large kind of events. Folks don't know what to expect. They're a little shocked that we have such strict mitigation efforts to try to throw this huge party. The other thing is they didn't know to what extent we were going to have Mardi Gras. You know, last year we had all the house floats, but all of our parades are back, and most of the crew members have all of their members. There were some funny things in terms of kind of telling this story. We had King's Day, the beginning of Mardi Gras was on January 6th, and I kind of went back and forth with my editors who didn't want to use the date January 6th because that meant something different to people across the world. And in Washington, D.C., that was the riot of the Capitol. But I said, no, it's important to us because that was the date the mayor said we will definitely, undoubtedly have Mardi Gras this year. So I thought it was important to mention that that date was our date. It was the date that we got to eat king cake again.
Right. And we've been eating it since, yes.
Right, and yeah, we have. And you know, interesting thing, we love Judy Woodruff, who anchors PBS NewsHour. She had retweeted the story that I did, and she wrote, crews, C-R-E-W. We all know our crews are with a K,
right.
And we both had a good chuckle about that. And, you know, those are the kinds of things I had to drop a little line or two in the story because folks don't know that we have kings and queens and royalty and maids and dukes, that the King of Rex will come out and issue a proclamation to his subjects, you know. So that kind of usually people are not sure what to do with that. And so it's always interesting to see that folks kind of understand what we do for Mardi Gras a whole lot differently. One story that I'll leave you on is that I also interviewed Arthur Hardy, and we all know who Arthur Hardy is, but my editors were like, I had called him the authority on Mardi Gras. Big fact checkers at PBS were like, how do we know that? Who said he was the authority? And I'm like, just ask anyone in New Orleans. We all know, past, present, or future, Arthur Hardy is the guy to go to if you need to know, particularly about context about Mardi Gras. And Arthur was very clear about what this Mardi Gras meant. And we use that in our headline where we said it's not just about our pocketbook, but this is about the soul of this city to be able to go out. We don't run away from crazy in this town. We throw a parade and march with it.
That's absolutely right.
I think one of the great moments in terms of getting the message across was after Katrina, when there was some serious discussion about not having parades that year, including like within the black community, people saying, how can you do this? There's so many poor people. Mayor Nagin was sort of on the fence about the issue, which way to go, which way not to. But what really made the difference was the crew of Zulu. Zulu says, hey, wait a minute, we're going to parade, right? And Zulu took a stand. And were it not for Zulu's stand, I think it really kind of helped galvanize everybody else, which made it easier for everybody to follow. And so I thought that was a very heroic moment. And having that, I always call that Mardi Gras the most important Mardi Gras ever, because it was the one that showed that New Orleans was back and it was marching again. It was going to take a stand. And Zulu's position really helped a lot with that.
And, it helped this time as well because Zulu was one of the first crews to embrace these requirements for all crews to be vaccinated or tested. And so with that support, that then lent support to the other crews who jumped on. And they were severely impacted with losing so many members. And one other point I'll mention is that a lot of folks are mentioning, as Errol just did, this feels a lot like that first Mardi Gras right after Katrina, where there's a lot more localism, where folks are really kind of coming back out to hug their neighbors again, to see how they were doing, to see what their struggles were, and to just celebrate that we all survived and to remember those that we lost.
And so the city is taking some extra steps to make sure that we're safe because we're worried about police shortage and shorter routes because of it. And also, of course, Omicron. What are they doing?
Yeah, so the mayor this week had a news conference and announced the safety plan and said that the city was indeed prepared and ready. The police chief, Sean Ferguson, came forward and said that we were adequately staffed. And so they kind of downplayed some of the staffing issues around police and EMS. They reiterated that we were going to get support once again, both on a national level and the state, although the number of state police are going to be a whole lot fewer as well. As far as the crews, they all seem to have embraced some of these requirements just to be able to put on a show. Some have gone even further in terms of like the muses. They're not doing a vaxxer test. They're just saying all members have to be vaccinated.
Okay. And then also the city is going to be staging some health stations up and down the parade route. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because if you look, Dr. Jennifer Vagno, the city health director, said, you know, the hospitals are full now more than they ever have been during Mardi Gras, and we know there's a lot of accidents and things that happen during Mardi Gras. I think at last check there were only 48 ICU beds that were remaining. So the city said they were going to set up health stations throughout the entire uptown route, so that folks who had a sprain or a fall or needed some medical attention, they were able to get that there when they needed and not kind of clog up the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the barometers of whether or not Mardi Gras is a success, we always look at the hotel rooms. This year, it looks like it's a little bit down. So the New Orleans and Company says there's about an 84% occupancy rate. Normally, that is about, 95 or higher, or even sold out. So it'll be very interesting to see how that kind of plays out. And the numbers for Monday and Tuesday normally are pretty high. Those numbers drop off for the number of people staying in the hotel. That also lends people to believe that it's going to be a regional event where folks want to come in for the weekend and then leave. Keep in mind, a lot of people use their vacation time during the pandemic, so they might not be able to stay the Monday and the Tuesday.
Quite true. Real quick, what's new for this Mardi Gras? What can we expect?
Well, one thing, Rex is celebrating its 150th anniversary. I think you can see a lot of history, and it's really a lot of rich history, because the history of Rex in 150 years is a good bit of the history of Mardi Gras, and so I think that's going to be important. I think you're seeing, by bits and pieces, an effort towards more environmentally friendly throws. Now, a crew like Endymion can't do that, but with the smaller parades that you can. And speaking of smaller parades, the number of the small crews, the sub-crews, the walking crews, is growing. I think that's wonderful, because that puts Carnival right down on the streets.
It really does, and it brings more and more people in
And
to really enjoy themselves.
At least compared to the Katrina year, all the crews still have their floats. After Katrina, a lot of the floats were waterlogged with, with blue tarps on them, and so the floats are in better shape.
All righty, E. Okay, guys, let's now go on over to John again. And you had a piece about a nursing home owner who came under fire after Hurricane Ida, who now has a health issue that he says prevents him from going to depositions.
Yes, indeed. This is Bob Dean, the nursing home owner who evacuated 7 nursing homes, a couple of them in Orleans Parish, some in Jefferson Parish, Lafourche, and he evacuated them to an Independence warehouse where that really devolved and became deadly, for it appears, for some patients there. Several died afterwards, and several more were hospitalized. 5 the state has deemed storm-related. Anyway, he's in a lot of trouble. He's had his 7 licenses revoked. He's fighting to gain them back. He's also the subject, a defendant in a couple of dozen lawsuits now filed by patients or family members over that evacuation, which started just before Hurricane Ida. Well, as part of that, obviously defense attorneys, or plaintiffs' attorneys, beg your pardon, want to question him. Last month, his attorneys said, he claims to live in Georgia now, and his attorneys said that he can't travel, and it would be bad for him to sit for depositions because he suffers from significant dementia and cognitive impairment, short-term and long-term memory loss. And 2 doctors from Georgia submitted letters in that regard. One doctor said he suffers from, he has a blood condition that affects his memory. A lot of the attorneys for the people who are suing him feel like that's a smokescreen, and they are hoping to test that idea that he's mentally incapable of answering questions.
At the time of Ida, was there anybody within his organization that was saying that or bringing up the issue? Is this
Well, I think Bob Dean himself raised that question in some of the comments he made in text messages he sent to Department of Health officials during this whole drama when they were trying to get in and inspect, and he was giving them, I would say, the business. He also spoke with a colleague of mine, Gordon Russell, over the phone, and seemed at times quite incoherent, or his reasoning wasn't quite sharp. He had said at the time that he had had oral surgery slightly before then, and in fact his doctors raised that as well in suggesting that he can't really sit for questioning.
So those nursing homes, the 7 nursing homes, they remain closed, right? That he's
Yeah, I
seeking-
mean, those people are sort of been, some mostly sort of absorbed by other nursing homes. Those are, I mean, there were 800 plus people who were evacuated to those facilities, or to the Independence warehouse.
And John, it's peculiar that he's now asking also for the licenses to some of these facilities back at a time when he's also saying he has these challenges.
Yeah, I've asked the Department of Health if they could comment on whether somebody who has a diagnosis of dementia can legally operate a nursing home in the state of Louisiana. I didn't really get an answer back, that a definitive answer back, but that's something we'll be looking into.
And also, I mean, it's caused a problem for a lot of folks because not everybody has been able to find a place nearby. I know, Roby, you said originally you're from the Lafourche area.
Yeah, so there's a lot of folks down there that are still kind of looking for a facility because they don't want to live too far away from their family.
Yeah.
And so a lot of folks are still displaced.
So that's really causing a problem. Are you seeing that too, John?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, there are several folks in nursing homes that are pretty far afield of where they came from.
All righty, guys. It is time now to take a look at other stories that are happening. So, E, let's start with you.
Well, I just want to mention actually I want to look back 50 years. There's a good bit of talk, and justifiably so, about the Super Bowl's halftime show and how creative it was. But it just reminded me, the very first Super Bowl, which was 1968, the halftime show was pretty much about New Orleans. That year that the Saints had just been awarded, or New Orleans had been awarded what became the Saints franchise. So the Grambling Band played in it, and so did Al Hurt, and they had a melody of songs about New Orleans. And so the city was the star of the first Super Bowl halftime show.
All right, it's a good memory. Roby, over to you.
I'm going to be watching, today is the end of the special legislative session to deal with congressional redistricting. It ends today. It doesn't look like they're going to end it with a map that increases black representation. So I'll be watching to see what repercussions happen after that and what kind of reaction there will be.
Do you think there's going to be some court battles?
Oh, definitely it will go into court. But again, it will be hard to see based on what we've seen in other areas. Alabama, the court did not seem to favor increasing it just for those reasons.
Right. John?
Well, there's been an issue lately about people who've had their cars stolen or carjacked or were carjacked and had to pay to get those cars out of towing facilities. Apparently City Council may soon be working up something to grant some relief to those folks.
Yeah, it brings to mind the old saying, insult to injury, right? Yeah. Because that's not inexpensive. It costs pretty much to get them out of a towing facility. All right, guys, I thank you all very much for being here, and I thank everybody out there for joining us, too, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Enjoy this big first weekend of a lot of parades. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.